Sure.
I'm sure too.
Yeah.
You saw this coming.
Yeah, no surprise here.
Yeah, I was on we're all on a lot of Zoom sessions. I was on one the other day I was talking to somebody, they were like, for the mission. Talking. See, Minneapolis. And we're just great,
Right.
conversation, a meeting. Oh, this is.
Yeah. The things you were quite concerned about digitization stuff.
I was. About.
Yeah.
Preservation of that, digitization for accident.
That's okay.
The long duration of the electronic record.
But I mean, paper fire, right?
Right.
Was in everything subject to something. And with digital electronic record, you can make 40.
But you need hardware and you need software.
Yeah, I thought
That's just money.
He's talking.
Yeah.
To obsolete.
Well, it's like, if you digital, you know, and that was true. Tapes and things like that. Okay, obsolescence was an issue. Okay, because it's working on some medium. But when it's electronic, when it's digital.
Born digital. Born electronic or born digital.
Well, no, it doesn't have to be born that way. But when it's digital, okay, it is in zeros and ones, okay, and it's in, memory, okay, but I mean, you can make multiple copies so quickly, distribute them around the country. You could have a safe keep, I mean, like right now, what's the big federal?
Yeah.
Federal data and stuff is, I mean, I don't mean secret stuff, but no, Library of Congress. Library of Congress is going to more and more and more digital because, I mean, it's easy to make copies and safeguard it and all that kind of stuff.
Well, that's what this Michigan Digital Preservation Network is.
Right, yeah.
It's a lock system. And that's what I'm on the governance board. It's a system that establishes locks and those locks being lots of copies keep stuff safe.
Yeah, right. I mean,
But Dark archive was
I mean,
curated over time so that 150 years from now,
right, I
you
mean,
can access the information regardless.
right.
I sit in classes and I have an arrest record that's 150 years old. And I'm reading it, I'm looking at it. Anything that's digital.
Somebody's crying, that's my grandfather.
I've had that happen.
I'm sure.
Actually happen. I had somebody said, but the question is, can you access that data? And use it effectively.
Yeah.
150 years. Who knows what medium that data is going to be on and how it's going to be
packing.
But if it's in multiple locations, and I mean, somebody's gonna be able to access it someplace. Yeah, it's, I mean, well, the what's this, ancestry.com, look how much money they're making out of having digital access records.
Favorite spy
Pardon?
Is that run by the Mormon Church by any chance?
No, I don't think that one is.
It is?
Ancestry.com is?
That's what I
But
thought.
they had fantastic records beginning. Did you know Whitney Johnston?
I knew of.
Okay, well, I knew Whitney well. My dad took me out to show me. Took me out to the temple out here in Harvey. And when he went to this room, and at that time, he was all excited about the digital records. They had a computer and they had stuff on CD-ROM. That's that, if you think about it, separation of church and state, for religious reasons, they provided a phenomenal resource. And, there's lots of people use it who have no religious reasons.
No. No, none whatsoever.
And,
It's a huge genealogical.
Because picking up
The IGA, they have a better
It's on the.
tourist. international
Yeah.
index.
They
I
always
don't know, I don't, you know, I'm not an ancestry.com person, she is.
They,
Amber.
Oh. Hi, Amber.
I saw my name on both classes. I get 10 points extra credit.
Oh, okay.
Hey,
I was like, so
you're the kind of person that probably doesn't need it even.
no, but I was like, you know, it's good to have it,
That's my
right?
daughter-in-law.
oh,
My daughter-in-law.
no, you're right. Yeah, you're right. I mean, digitization, that's why I'm pushing it so much. It's because bring it cool back.
Yeah, I mean,
We get so many people.
I was worried that I would never be quiet enough.
That's amazing. Yeah, we're
We're
getting
it shouldn't matter because I got-
the downside is we're getting less fewer people.
well, you've done a phenomenal job.
I think it thinks
You really have.
That's
That's, yeah, I mean, it made the difference. I mean, we started it with the predecessors. And,
I remember.
Pardon?
You probably remember.
oh, yes, and, but I mean, you have made a serious difference.
Well, getting that stuff out there. You know, when you go out into the hinterland and the community, you see these collections of wonderful materials out there. It's just like.
better than.
Literally room closets.
I have my
and,
blazer with it, so it's like.
Broken down garages.
Yeah, I saw,
There you
watching
go.
on TV show the other night, if somebody was doing
You
some
get plenty of,
research.
you know, uses on your
In France.
clothes.
Right.
And they were, you know, people were bringing these musty documents and everything, and they took their hours and hours. You know, and I mean, the thing about digital search too, is you have all the power, you know, of search algorithms.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, when you're sitting there watching stuff,
Yeah.
your eyes.
Focus on its own.
Oh, right.
You know, but if you put in 15 search terms, you know.
I think that's probably the best way.
I
I think that's
use
probably.
Yes.
And then that way the people can see the. I'm not.
Yeah.
Oh, so I appreciate your help.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's my own personal stuff.
Manage fires also.
Yeah, and I can pick up.
Oh, yeah, what Aaron said. Good luck.
If I was just scanning the paper.
The thing about baseball history is it's flying with so many other things.
Yeah,
Racial
exactly.
history, you know,
Are
labor
you a baseball
unions.
fan?
Huh?
Are you a baseball fan?
All right, thank you. Yeah, you should be upset.
Oh, I thought he is. Are you a baseball fan?
Not particularly. I'm a fan of everything and anything.
That's true.
You're also ageless, by the way. You see the age. I don't see the age.
I am just curious.
He got old early.
There you go. I'm curious as hell about all kinds of stuff. But, do you remember?
Been here 26 years.
Yeah, he was here in that time. period.
Scanning very bright.
How are you doing?
Making sure-
Yeah, sign in over there.
No, we didn't sign.
Oh, these are students who have to sign
Yeah,
it.
that's nice. That's a lot of points right there. I'm not gonna lie. You know what? It's like, yeah, I know I totally forgot to turn
It's
it up.
Catherine Johnson.
Yeah, like that. Just like, well, oh, 100%. Yeah. And I'm missing class on Wednesday because we're going to Chicago. That's exciting. Yeah, it's like, oh, they're sending us down there from.
Adam Knight.
Again, so.
I don't know him, but
Sustainable farming.
I only know that anymore.
Like, you just go
Are you
and get like.
familiar with the Keweenaw Tribe?
It seems
What a time to
familiar.
do it. Yeah, really.
Search Keweenaw time travel.
Maybe.
Keweenaw what?
Keweenaw time travel.
Keweenaw time traveler.
Oh, time traveler.
Keweenaw time traveler.
Right.
And it's a relational, it's a interactive database or interactive website. It uses archival, digitized archival material that allows you to track people. Using creating spatial mapping.
Oh, yeah, so-
And I wanted to do a class with me collaborate, probably collaborates with them. Context, to have students work on not only do digital work, but digital reproduction, but also editing work and research.
I have been both.
We've had like 47 faculty staff.
Oh, it's like double.
4 minutes.
Hey, you know, I was like, I would have joined your faction and like asked help for an election, but I was like, I'm gonna leave it. Yeah, so I.
That's what I felt like.
What?
You might be bigger.
Can you see everybody okay?
Sounds good.
Oh. Move over this way too. Oh, if I do that, I'll move in front of everybody else.
One more.
It's crazy. It's driving people.
Loafers, you have a good crowd.
You're trying to do like a reverse psychology.
So.
It's not required for us though. Not required.
You guys are special. So what do you think of all the changes going on? For floors since you've been on?
Well, when I was teaching, I often put a headline on a banner on your syllabus. My banner was the only constant is change.
Yeah, it's amazing to me when I think about some of the people. You being one of them.
Yeah.
I don't know anybody.
Well, I think you don't know anybody. Gosh.
Well, there you go.
I also. Can I say people? I still know some people.
You got a machine? So.
My
I was
big
like, I'm gonna start dressing
concern
the main
is.
character. They were like going to.
Yes, they pretty much live in
That's my
Arizona,
life now.
but they employ
Just so
him
you know.
all the time. Just like Eric Smith, he retired once too, but the trouble is that some of these people.
I was like, in the way it's going, next thing I know, like as a woman, I'll be like.
It's hard to replicate quicker. I mean, it's a massive huge system. You know, I mean, he didn't know anything.
I'm Riley.
One of the
Amber.
Amber. Yeah.
Okay. I'll do my best.
when we were first talking about
Nice.
a fight between.
I was at the Amber TTC. Yeah.
Right, and you're in the Native American class, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm in her civil rights class too.
For
so I
the
just-
sour,
Yeah.
sour.
But yeah, we're doing 2 RTTPs of the other class.
Yeah.
We like just finished starting another one.
Oh my gosh.
I just like that. I don't
Shutting
know.
She said something, I said, okay, no, son of a bitch leaves us,
But yeah.
so we agree on how.
The RTTPs were was like interesting. I feel like I learned way more than like just like reading, like listening to
No
other
more.
people like talk and stuff. And
Yeah.
a lot of the speeches.
No, I mean, you forget stuff.
I know.
But,
How many times? Like,
yeah, that was a good time.
So she did our TP before.
Okay, it's 7 o'clock. Wow, thank you all for coming this evening. This is a really great turnout. It's wonderful to see you all. Welcome to the Central Upper Peninsula and NMU Archives. My name is Marcus Robbins. I'm the University Archivist. This is our winter semester installment of Evening at the Archives. We try to do one of these at least each semester, so look for us again next fall. And we'll have another presentation for you. Today, we're very fortunate using modern technology. And by the way, one of the founders of our technological system that we have here at Northern is here with us tonight. Fred Joyle, the former provost of the university, is here, and he is probably the father of the laptop program. Well, he's one of the fathers. You were on the motorcycle, weren't you?
Yes.
Yes, you were. So there you go. We have with us today, thanks to technology, Dr. Camden Burd, who is assistant professor at Eastern Illinois University. He's written extensively in a number of publications about the history of the region. He is he came here last summer as part of the Grace Minyagi Research Grant, and Dr. Minyagi is also right here with us today. He's right there. Thank you very much, Dr. Miyagi. And he spent about a week, I think he was here going through our collections that we have, both political and environmental activism. Our collections documenting political activism and environmental activism for his research. And we've asked him to come back and give us a presentation today about what he found and where he's at with that research. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Camden.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Marcus. Thank you all for coming. What a great turnout here. Can you all hear me all right? Yes. Okay. I see nods. That's good. That's a good sign. Well, thank you again for being here. First of all, of course, thanks to Northern Michigan University and thanks to the Grace Mignoggy Research Fellowship. I was able to make the commute up to Marquette. They haven't started working on the direct flight from Charleston, Illinois to Marquette, Michigan yet, but I'm sure it's in the works. So we'll work on that. And I wish I could be there with you because I know also late March in Marquette is beautiful. So anyway, I appreciate you all coming out here and talking about this. I'm going to quickly do a screen share here so you can give you some visuals to look at. All right. How's that? Is that coming through all right?
Yeah.
Cool. So the project today really is sort of at the beginning of a new project that I'm working on, a broader project on some research that I've actually done at Northern Michigan University in the past. And I'm really interested in this window of time in the post-World War II period in the Upper Peninsula, the whole region entirely, which is when I see like a period of really shifting change economically, politically, socially as well. And in that, there's a great deal of debate about sort of like what the Upper Peninsula meant during this time period. And central to that question of sort of in this change, in these economic changes, in these social changes, the question is sort of like, what does this region mean anymore? And I think that has to be a question that is about the environment as well. And so this really is a project that is looking at political activism, as Marcus said at the beginning, political activism, environmental activism, but also sort of like actual real material changes to the environment as well. So to give you a sense of, I'm going to do sort of snapshots of a few individuals who are sort of attempting to navigate this period of change. And that means I unfortunately will start not in Central Upper Peninsula, but I promise I'll get there eventually. But I think it's important to understand what's going on in the Western Upper Peninsula as well to see the connections between these regions. So I want to start in copper country. Now, this is a region that copper mining had been in decline really since the early decades of the 20th century, though had seen some sort of momentary support, particularly through World War II period in which government contracts helped subsidize it and ensure sort of good wages for workers. It gave a regional boost to the economy. But however, as the war ended, those contracts run out and you start to see sort of pretty immediate economic decline in that region. You see closures of mines in that region, which of course means less mining activity, less smelting. Both of these realities mean less work, which of course means an outmigration of residents of this region. And if you look at the census during this period of time, you do see some of those numbers. From 1940 to 1960, the three-county region, including Houghton, Keweenaw, and Ontonagon counties, saw a population decline of nearly 25%. During this time period, you also see companies trying to sell off their assets. That means homes or vacant lots or mines. You see a lot of closures, bus lines, trolley lines. These are the infrastructures of what was a very paternalist-driven corporate system start to close down during that time period as well. This is often an era that we think of sort of the affluent society of the post-war boom, but in copper country, this was a very hyper-local recession. And so you have to understand that context. If we move a little further east to where you are, right, the decline in iron mining really is a sort of slower process, and it doesn't come for several decades. It's mostly going to be offset by the rise of taconite mining, which allows for these mines to stay open a little bit longer. However, that is sort of low-grade iron. So it's sort of a very environmentally, rough. It's bad for the environment. It's worse for the environment the way that the mines sort of refine this low grade ore into pellets. We'll talk about that in a second. But really, iron mining in the region is going to see an increasing competition from Western mines, where iron is much cheaper to get, but also the import of cheap steel from abroad, which is going to lead to sort of a tightening of the iron market in central Upper Peninsula as well. The outside competition became especially apparent through the 1960s when operational mines dropped from 30 underground iron mines in 1960 to 19 in 1961. By the end of the decade, only 9 were operational in the central Upper Peninsula. Now, the decline in production, of course, combines with automated mining processes as part of this new taconite mining process, which leads to a rise of layoffs as well as unemployment. And again, if you look at statistics in census, I mean, it's not as dramatic as Copper Country, but really, if you look at Ishpeming, nearly 9,000 residents in 1960. That number will drop to about 7,500 in 1980. Negaunee, just over 6,000 residents in 1960, down to just over 5,000 residents 20 years later. Overall, the Upper Peninsula from 1950 to 1970 is going to see about 20,000 people leave the area. Now, that doesn't seem like a lot, but the overall population is not that high either. So it's actually a significant portion of the population who is leaving the Upper Peninsula during this time period. That economic fracture, that economic sort of fallout is also affecting all aspects of the regional economy. Operating farms in the region also see a huge decline during this time period. Over 5,000 operational farms will be, there will be over 5,000 operational farms in the Upper Peninsula in 1950. But in 1970, the number of farms has fallen to just under 3,000, which is almost a 5,000 or a 50% decrease in the farming land in the region as well. And I want to posit, like, as I talk about all these economic issues, that this isn't just an economic issue. These are questions of identity. This is sort of a fracturing of an economic base, but in the minds of many residents, right? Mining and its related activities were sort of defining features of the region, right? You don't call it Copper Country if you don't associate the region with a particular industry, right? For those who saw the Central UP as iron mining region, right? That is a defining aspect of the regional economy. Home, for better or worse, for many of these individuals, was intimately tied to this economic engine. And as that engine begins to stall, residents rightfully struggle to make sense of that present moment and will fight to preserve some sense of the future. And this is the context of my research, right? In a period of economic precarity and shifting identities, new ideas and individuals will emerge. These individuals, their ideas, and maybe what I'll call imagined futures, are worth studying because they reveal some economic preferences and political priorities for a diverse range of actors who will live in this region and take a great deal of pride in what sort of the Upper Peninsula means during this time period. So I'm going to focus on a few different individuals here. And I did give sort of a much sort of different version of this talk, part of this talk at Michigan Tech a few weeks ago. So if there was any overlap, someone will recognize the first part of this. But I want to talk about someone who I first encountered years ago in Northern Michigan archives, in your archives there, which was an individual named Kenneth Dorman. Now, he sort of popped up in a few letters. He popped up in a few notes in the Dominic Jacobetti papers, but his voice came through loud and clear. He actually was a legislative aide for Jacobetti, but Dorman actually lived in the Western Upper Peninsula in Houghton. And so I had the opportunity to spend a few days, and they have a small collection there. So I wanted to figure out who this guy was, how he got brought into the Jacobetti political sphere. Also, like, of note, they're not of the same political party as far as I can tell. So it's also interesting in that regard that they see themselves as sort of aligned in their project in protecting the Upper Peninsula's economy. Kenneth Dorman was born near London, Ontario. In Canada in 1913. He attended school in Ontario and Michigan before working for General Motors and the Ford Company. He enlisted in the Army Corps of the Army Air Corps during World War II, saw some service in England, and after the war, he and his family moved to Houghton, Michigan, where he got involved in local economic development projects. He started his own consulting firm, Kenman Associates. He reorganized the Upper Peninsula Development Bureau, which had sort of been floundering as a regional booster organization. And he also would set to sort of transform that organization ultimately into the Upper Michigan Tourist Association. Dorman was interested in growing the economy of the region, right? He's a booster. He's a booster and he wants to grow the economy. And so he's partaking in a lot of activities like sort of promoting local tourist economy, right? His organization would print something like a pamphlet like this, right? Which is just sort of you can see right in the middle, fold out of the brochure. You can see the Upper Michigan Tourist Association signed there in the middle, right? He would work alongside tourist industries, restaurants, local chambers of commerce to promote the region in various ways. This meant going to conferences, advising businesses to fund and support his work. And though his work is ranging, and you'll see in a second, it's quite ranging, Dorman spent a great deal of time trying to brand the region as an ideal tourist destination for vacationers from surrounding regions of the Midwest. His collection contains a variety of pamphlets and brochures like this one. And this one, right, like it's promoting the Upper Peninsula, Western Upper Peninsula as like the ski destination. It's got the best snow in the region. Come on up, come enjoy the sort of local environments for that way. Directed towards downstate residents, of course, right? He hoped that as mining decreased, this would sort of help the local economy, right? This could be a pivot into a tourist-based economy as he sees this sort of mining economy start to slip in the Western Upper Peninsula. He also distributed materials like this one, which maybe seem a little more homemade. I think a lot of the content was a little homemade. But essentially, this is distributed to local businesses in the. Such materials were meant to encourage regional businesses to support the tourism economy in any way, shape, or form. This document in front of you outlines how businesses might leave visitors with a positive image of the Upper Peninsula. Restaurant servers were encouraged to learn local history in case visitors might have questions. Managers should be well aware of other tourist destinations nearby so that they can act as liaisons, encouraging spending at other nearby businesses. And the documents offer a variety of advice on how to improve the overall image of the region, maybe for downstate residents who had heard of all the layoffs, who have heard of the tough economic times in these mining areas. The goal is to rebrand the Upper Peninsula in a way. They wanted friendly faces, memorable experiences, and a region of residents knowledgeable of the local history and optimistic about the future of the region as well. Perhaps the most interesting document I saw that Dorman helped produce was not about developing the local tourist economy. I found a series of proposals directed actually towards the Department of Defense, in which Dorman argued that the Upper Peninsula would be an ideal region for future defense spending. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, Dorman began to imagine the Upper Peninsula as an ideal destination for federal funds as they geared up to combat the looming specter of communism. Dorman's connections from his service days, the heightened Cold War threat, of course, and the presence of abandoned mines in Michigan's Upper Peninsula led the economic developer to envision a new future for the region. This future, he argued, would transition underground mines into underground cities or bunkers or missile silos. Now, before you think this is like an absolutely ridiculous proposal at face value, I want to be clear, like this is based in actual thinking of the time period. This individual, Herman Kahn, a prominent Cold War game theorist, really is sort of seen as like one of the founders of game theory. Herman Kahn was a prominent Cold War thinker. He was high up in the RAND Corporation, which is the research of the Air Force. Herman Kahn was the one who was promoting this idea that you could, in fact, build entire cities in underground, and that this was actually an effective means of sort of combating sort of Cold War fears, but also in the advent of a nuclear war, you could usher an entire population underground. The logic was building more bombs isn't enough. that is not enough to sway the enemy, the communists, that we are willing to live in a post-nuclear age. He said that if you build entire cities with factories, with food stores underground, that demonstrates to the enemy that you are in fact like willing to play the long game. Like you're here, you're ready for it. And that is very much in the air. That is what is being used as Dorman is coming up with this proposal. And I have a few images from this proposal. I mean, it's, this is again, we're not talking about super detailed drawings here, but to give you a concept of what he's looking at, right? So here is an abandoned mine shaft. And he's sort of outlining how the mine shaft works, but he's also like clearly articulating the fact that like, well, if it's far enough underground, you can see the explosion on the surface will be far enough down that it won't affect the underground installation here, which you can see at the bottom there. It will protect anyone who's down there. I have one more image on here. Here's a little bit more sort of, I guess, slightly more specificity of like what sort of things would be on the different levels of this mine. Vegetable stores at the top, deep freezers. As you make your way down, a motor pool, a decontamination area, headquarters, and of course you need a power plant underground as well, because it's going to power all these cities as well. So like this is very much sort of like in Dorman's proposal. He is putting this forward. He is sending this off to the Department of Defense. As a veteran, as a sympathetic Cold Warrior, Dorman was certainly immersed in sort of the zeitgeist of planning, preparing, and worrying for the possibility of nuclear war. However, he was likely drawn to Kahn's ideas due to his role as an economic developer, right? As unemployment's rising, as outmigration's shrinking the local economy, any plan or proposal that called for massive spending, government spending in the region would have found an eager audience in Dorman. The proposal went through great lengths to describe why this region in particular was ideal. It talks about a whole host of things: the nearby resources, the cool climates, interior location away from major metropolitan cities on either coast, access to water in the lakes. But the big assets were not necessarily the climate, the water, the food, or other raw materials. It was the mines. This is what made copper country special. What many in the region had come to see as a sign of economic decline, abandoned mines, had now been given new purpose in Dorman's formulation. Though the report was intended to demonstrate the potential of the region for Cold War planning, one cannot help but notice the unique economic arguments throughout the document. As Dorman and others sought, federal spending could preserve a semblance of the economic past, a region that had been defined largely by mining. Every report that he wrote, and he put a few of these reports together, noted the availability of miners, mining equipment, mining companies, and an entire institution in Western Upper Peninsula was well versed with thinkers thinking about underground projects. Michigan Tech now, but the Michigan College of Mines. He was seeking to sell the region for future economic development, but in a way, he was also seeking to maintain the region as it was. And again, the report was backed by several parties in Michigan's copper country that at least acknowledged that the proposal would bring severe economic, like very real benefits. Representatives from the Calumet and Hecla Mining Corporation signed on to this proposal. Representatives from the Quincy Mining Company sold on to this proposal. Several researchers at Michigan College of Mining and Technology signed on to this proposal. This was not a Cold War kook, right? Sending off some sort of jumbled proposal to Washington. This was for those who signed on, like a very real possible way to sort of help the economy and use the assets as they sought to support the region. Okay, so I want to pivot now. So we have Kenneth Dorman in the Western Upper Peninsula. Understanding sort of his project and his motives helps us maybe to understand his connection to a prominent political figure in Central Upper Peninsula. And that would be, if my slide works, Dominic Jacobetti. Now, Jacobetti is a prominent politician of buildings named after him. As you know, I'm sure many of you have classes or something. There's a Jacobetti building on campus, yes. Born in Negaunee, Michigan in 1920, Jacobetti, like many of that era, sort of found employment in the nearby iron mines after completing his high school education. He won the trust of his peers and members of the United States Steelworkers Union, elected him to serve as president of the local chapter. He was an advocate for miners and mining communities in the region. Jacobetti successfully ran for state office, and in 1955, he began his first term as representative of Marquette County. Now, as a legislator, he really does epitomize the New Deal coalition, right? Throughout the 1960s, Jacobetti sought to increase funding for schools, hospitals, and roads in the Upper Peninsula. He was a staunch blue-collar Democrat. However, I will note that his political ties sort of start to waver over the course of the 1960s. And I think that's because of a variety of reasons, local reasons, that is to say, deindustrialization, outmigration, and local recession. And those factors are a central tenet of his sort of politicking throughout the 1960s and 1970s. He believed that depopulation and economic recession remained the twin afflictions facing the region. He began to oppose any legislation that he believed might further sort of exacerbate the struggle for the people of the Upper Peninsula. In the 1960s and the 1970s, that often meant sort of fighting any sort of environmental legislation that was being passed during that time period, often arguing that it was environmental legislation that directly hurt the prospect of developing more jobs in the region. He believed that federal air regulations had, quote, horrendous effects on the people, businesses, and industries of the state of Michigan. He was fiercely pro-development and fiercely anti-environmental in his rhetoric. And this also put him at odds with a new wing of the Democratic Party, like the New Left, right? And this that started to openly embrace this environmental agenda as the 1960s wore on. This sort of vision of developing the economy in order to retain a connection to the industrial past in order to preserve the sort of regional future was not embraced by all. That is to say, in particular, I'm talking about the environmental movement that had been fomenting through the 1950s, but really began to pick up steam in the 1960s and 1970s. This movement was led by a different sort of face, a different sort of person than what had been the voice of power during this time period. Certainly different than Dorman, certainly different than Jacobetti. It was often led by young activists, students, college students, or recently graduated college students. It was also often led by women. These are different faces than the normal wheels of power that had defined much of the politicking in the Upper Peninsula prior. Their vision of Upper Peninsula challenged the inherent power structures, but also the baseline vision of what this region meant. And this brings me to another collection I had the opportunity to work through while at Northern Michigan, and that is the papers of Julia Tibbets. Julia Tibbets was born in Marquette in 1917, so similar time period as Jacobetti here, and spent some time at prestigious boarding schools outside of the state of Michigan before returning to Northern Michigan University in 1965. Julia married Monroe Tibbets, who had a career in corporate real estate, managing the extensive land holdings of John Monroe Longyear, the famous land baron of the region. Julia was fond of Presque Isle, and I don't need to lecture you on sort of Presque Isle. I'm sure you all get to go there. It's a beautiful spot. I wish we could be, well, maybe not in late March, but it's a beautiful space. This was a space of particular importance for her, right? It had long been a place of community building, a place she considered especially beautiful, maybe sort of the best of what sort of the Marquette region had to offer environmentally. And she became involved in the environmental movement in 1973 when she learned that the Upper Peninsula Generating Company planned to expand and build an additional loading dock near Presque Isle, as well as expand the power plant that would support this new sort of path for mining, the Cleveland Cliffs mining operation, and again, sort of expanding the Upper Peninsula Generating Company's output as well. These were believed to be necessary updates to sort of maximize efficiencies for energy, but also to power this new mode of taconite mining, which was very energy intensive. She founded the Superior Public Rights Organization, which was a sort of legal body that was used to challenge many of these projects. And she does begin a series of legal challenges and starts a grassroots movement to stop the construction of this project. She worried that this new project would, as it called for damming the dead river, would destroy the run of smelt that moved up that river. She worried that an increased presence of coal would pollute the water and the surrounding landscape. And she embraced a rhetoric that would be really common for the environmental movement of that day. It's important to note that her vision of Upper Peninsula is different than Jacobetti's. That is to say, right, hers was not trying to reconnect to an industrial past, but actually to preserve sort of the idea that this region is sort of particularly and especially beautiful compared to industrial landscapes around the upper Midwest or the Upper Peninsula. She feared that this region might be lost to further industrial development. And few of these landscapes held particular affection to many, like Presque Isle, right? It embodied for many the best of this region. The vision that Jacobetti and his legislative aide Dorman had supported, she believed, put those visions at risk. And so she leads this grassroots movement, these legal challenges to stop the project. As one can imagine, tensions arose between Jacobetti and these environmental groups, who he believed were just one more hurdle for improving the economic well-being of those in the region. As I noted, Jacobetti hesitated to support just about any legislation that called for the further protection of natural spaces. His aversion, of course, grew from the unique demographic realities of the Upper Peninsula. It's a region that's already pretty sparsely populated, right? Nearly 40% of the region's residents lived within a 90-mile stretch of land between Marquette and Houghton. And to the untrained eye, right, most of the peninsula already look like wilderness, so maybe we don't need to make more wilderness. That was sort of his logic in stopping blocking lands being sort of tucked away. Jacobetti might have been a little more tactful than Dorman, his legislative aide, who was much more vocal about his contempt for environmental groups. When Tibbetts is trying to stop this construction project, fearing of air pollution and other sorts of pollution, Dorman responds sort of viscerally. Again, in his dual roles as legislative aide for Jacobetti, but also in his role as sort of an economic developer, he thought these proposals to stop the construction of a power company were bad for the economy, right? This would get jobs. This would improve sort of the actual economic output, if only just for a short while. He writes, when discussing these proposals by environmental groups, I have teenagers in college, and when they and other students, especially those who have been brainwashed by overzealous environmentalists, read such notices, they are wrongly impressed. They visualize that almost every industry in our state are big, bad, smoke polluting guys in black hats, and they should be against them. So you can clearly see a very drastic anti-environmental message. It's also interesting here when we talk about, again, sort of that environmental movement, that it is a youth movement, that is often a movement led by women, that he is explicitly calling that out. He sees this as a problematic youth problem, that they just don't get it. They're not living in the real world, right? So you see these social tensions playing out on the ground as well. Jacobetti is a little bit more reserved in his language, and he focused most of his arguments as economic arguments. When hearings were announced to review the proposal to build that facility at Presque Isle, Jacobetti wrote a letter directly to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers office in St. Paul, Minnesota. In it, he directly argued that these environmental groups directly hurt the economic well-being of the region, as well as the inhabitants who struggled from the stall projects. Here's a quote from him in that letter. During the last 5 or 6 years, it seems that every single new important project to the economy of rural Michigan, and especially in my district, that will enhance the economy and provide vitally needed jobs to offset our dwindling population, has come under serious attack by environmental groups individually or collectively. The delays of those groups in Michigan on important projects have already cost overruns of well over $1 billion in the last 6 years alone, and thus has contributed substantially to inflation and the energy crisis. The argument here is clear. The environmental movement is hurting an already struggling economy. And in the context of the 70s, with the energy crisis, with the onset of stagflation, right? The environmental movement seemed utterly detached from the real realities of this movement. It seemed, as he saw it, to harm residents. Such rhetoric also probably helps us understand Jacobetti's role in the Upper Peninsula statehood movement. I don't want to focus on this too long. I've written in other places, and I know you've done exhibits in the recent past about this as well. But I do believe that the UP statehood movement of the 1970s was largely an anti-environmental movement. Jacobetti's plea for secession, you can see him here rocking this T-shirt. It would be so fascinating if there were sort of like these old archives of some of this like 1970s statehood swag. I mean, that would be the real gem of sort of an archival collection. It would be interesting to see. But the plea for secession stemmed from this growing sentiment among regional residents who believe that downstate politicians sort of encumbered economic growth that largely took the shape of bureaucracies. And during this time period, that often means sort of environmental bureaucracies that are being formed. The materials that often go out advocating for the statehood movement. One of the main arguments is this, quote, "The major reason for the decline in Michigan's position as an industrial state has been the ill-designed legislation passed at the federal and state levels, which almost completely destroys the ability for wise development of our natural resource." Jacobetti hoped that a separate state might, quote, "handle its own resources by eliminating most of the unnecessary environmental costs in the production of natural resources." Now, environmentalists saw through this statehood movement. Another environmental group papers who I got to look at were the Citizens to Save the Lake Superior Shoreline, which was a group founded by Dorothy Bird. No personal relationship to me. She had founded this group, a blossoming environmental group that also was fighting what was initially a proposal to build that infrastructure a little further north from Presque Isle, Little Presque Isle, and successfully stopped that project as well. But they're on record explicitly calling out Jacobetti's statehood movement, arguing that this is sort of a frantic effort to get around legislative law, like to get around environmental regulation. That is the sole group, and destroy, in their words, quote, "the environmental heritage of the Upper Peninsula." Now, the arguments that Jacobetti and Dorman often lob at environmental groups is not actually that fair to many of the actual arguments of environmental organizations. Critiques of modern environmentalism often overshadowed the real efforts of state and national politicians who believe that environmental legislation might actually improve the economic realities of many of these places, including the Michigan Upper Peninsula. Like, for example, Phil Hart, a Democrat and United States Senator from the state of Michigan. He was the first to introduce the bill to create the Pictured Rocks National Lakeshore in 1961. This is not a picture from that. This is him as he also proposed legislation for Sleeping Bear Dunes. He was a major mover in creating these parks in Michigan. Hoping to tap into the growing tourist economy that individuals like Dorman helped to build, he hoped that like creating these massive parks would actually encourage people to travel further distances, to make longer vacation trips to these regions, right? And he believed that using federal dollars to create these new parks, to support these new parks, actually would improve the depressed Upper Peninsula economy as well. And at a local level, this is also playing out. Tibbetts, with her movement, she recognizes that Jacobetti is trying to argue that environmentalists are not thinking about the economy. And that's just simply not the case. She enlisted the help of Frank Stafford, who was and remains a professor of economics at the University of Michigan, to attempt and study the economic impact of the park of Presque Isle and the potential downfall, the potential harm that this expansion project would have on the economy of Marquette as well. They attempted to place an economic value on the beauty of Presque Isle and the popularity of the park. What's clear from reading this document is this fundamental disagreement about the economic future of the region. Tibbets and others who opposed the construction of the new loading facility saw value in a particular perception of the region that was defined by pristine beauty, right? Not extractive industries. You can see here this is from that report that Stafford wrote, right? Tourism, he argues, is, after automobiles, Michigan's largest industry. And should public policy allow the possibility of sizable losses in the future of this industry for the sake of what may be small savings in the siting for the mining industry? So he's making the case on an economic argument that, in fact, it is more advantageous to cultivate a tourist-based economy than it is to potentially harm that by building these new industrial infrastructures. These arguments posed by Stafford and Tibbets are not against development. They're not anti-capitalist even, right? Not as Dorman and Jacobetti tried to paint them. These environments hope to use economic arguments as a tool for preservation, as a tool for protecting the environment. This was a battle of competing vision and corresponding economic identities, right? That would have long-standing economic impacts on the natural environments of the region. Ultimately, Tibbets will lose the struggle on protecting Presque Isle from this expansion project. She challenged the company, Cleveland Cliffs Mine, and the Michigan Department of Natural Resources collectively. She lost on, I believe, all counts of her legal challenges. The infrastructure was expanded and the blight she hoped would dodge was constructed. Though in her 1991 book, Let's Go Around the Island, Tibbets does reflect on her experience. In her loss, she described a dissatisfaction with the broader political realities that she believed she was facing in the Upper Peninsula in this particular window of time. She saw the residents of Upper Peninsula like still trapped in a particular paradigm, one committed to particular realities and particular economic priorities. In the mid-1970s, Marquette was still interested in iron mining, or at least being directed and guided by those forces of a previous iron mining sort of political economy. In her book, Let's Go Around the Island, I'm going to point out a few reasons, right? She's pretty clear. She's like, I want to lay out the reasons why I think my move failed entirely. And so she lays out too. It's a really interesting read, actually. I mean, it's a really interesting memoir of sort of her experience in this entire process. Cause one: when one is raised to believe that the corporation is always right and has only a fatherly interest in all its dealings with employees, land, and other businesses, this becomes a personal concept. Cause two: when one's bread and butter comes from doing business with said corporation, one does not rock the supply boat. Tibbets was demonstrating a frustration with a region whose identity was still intimately tied to one particular industry, one particular company, in this case, the Cleveland Cliffs Mining Company. As this project continues to develop, and what I would hope to do, actually, Marcus, we should talk. I just got internal funding. I'm going to be up in Marquette sometime this summer. Things I would like to explore further is actually looking at the student movement around environmentalism at Northern Michigan University, but also at places like Michigan Tech as well. How did these young activists, many who embody this new left of this time period, right? How do they view environmentalism? What is feeding Dorman's view that like young activists simply don't get how this whole economy thing works? I'd also like to see how state politicians outside of the Upper Peninsula understood these economic developments. I also would like to get deeper into the experiences of individual miners. That is to say, we've looked a lot about people who are interested in the economy. We've looked at the words of environmentalists. We've looked at the sort of clear policy positions of those companies, but actually getting a sense of how everyday workers understood this movement during this time period, how they understood the rise of the environmental movement, how they understood deindustrialization, how they understood recession, and how they understood the shifting nature of the Democratic Party during this time period. And what's interesting about this story is this sort of larger fundamental debate about the future meaning of the region. Faced with the affliction of economic catastrophe, several individuals began to imagine the region in a variety of ways. Some, like Dorman, hoped to reinvigorate the economy by adapting the new configurations enabled by Cold War military apparatus to maintaining a mining infrastructure that had defined the economy in the Western Upper Peninsula. Jacobetti, broad in his vision, sought economic development in seemingly any way possible, largely ignoring the ecological implications of his arguments and proposals. And Tibbets and other environmental groups, however, proposed something else. Inspired by this new movement of the post-war, environmentalists envisioned a new path for the region that celebrated its natural setting, which challenged the traditional economic and social structures that had defined the region for much of the Upper Peninsula's sort of Anglo-European history. In this moment, that debate was very live. A tension that has, and I will argue, probably still does divide many who live in the Upper Peninsula, but certainly in the Midwest at large. And this is the project that I hope to continue. I'm also, I want to thank you all for your time. I'm happy to take questions. And I'd also actually be really interested in feedback. I find at these presentations, the community is very helpful in sort of tracking down more sources and more ideas next. So thank you all for coming, and I'm happy to take questions.
Can you unshare?
Yes, sorry. There we go.
Can you see everybody in the audience pretty well?
I can actually. It's great quality.
I'd like to answer. Okay, Dan.
Yeah, I really love your research and what you dug up. And yeah, it's a good beginning because there's so much more I think that you're going to find. You talked about, you kept saying Western UP. I grew up in the Western UP, which is county. And Gogebic County and also the Menominee Iron Range were put out of business by taconite mining because their ore was too high grade to be used in the taconite process or the pelletizing process. And so basically the economies of those areas were destroyed by the technological advance. And so they've never recovered really. Especially Gogebic County, it's never really recovered from that. And it's something I think you should look into a little bit more. And it also ties in with what you talked about. I love that Dorman's handbook for tourism, because growing up there, we moved there in the late 70s. There was an open hostility towards tourists.
Oh, really? Okay.
Even though it had become the bread and butter of the area, the feeling was, we used to have real jobs. We used to have a real economy, and now we sell pasties to skiers. And they really hated that. And so there really was an open hostility to outsiders, to tourists, that his idea that, hey, we got to, be good tourist people and yeah, that didn't always catch on. It wasn't that everyone was like that, but I saw it often just as kind of an open hostility. And then just one last thing I want to add to that. Two of the high schools, my high school and Bessemer High School right next to Wakefield, back in the early 2000s, decided to combine their football programs, the high school football programs. And even though there hadn't been a mine open in 40 years, guess what name they chose? The mascot.
Yes, I love it. Okay, that's beautiful.
It shows how hard ingrained the identity is, even though there hasn't been a mine open in Gogebic counties. So there's just things to look into.
No, I love that, and I love those points, and that is absolutely all these I would like to dig into. I mean, when I was looking through the Dorman papers, because his career is also so ranging, because as you can see, I mean, he's interested in tourism. He's proposing underground cities to the Department of Defense. I mean, like he's like, let's generate activity, let's do this. But it was clear in those documents about tourism that he was facing hostility, right? He almost talking down to regional residents. Like there's a sense of like they don't want to, like, a smile goes a long way. Like that was in that guidebook. Like, have you tried smiling when people show up? And it's not that people like don't like me, but like there's clear contempt for like these changes that are going on. And now you have this like booster coming in and telling us how we should sort of preserve this economic moment. I think, to what you're saying, like this is a very complex social landscape in this period of change as well. Yes, and I'm very interested in tracking sort of the Menominee piece of that story as well, and how it's actually the technological advance that hurts that region. So that's super fascinating as well. So thank you. Yeah.
Another story, a question, sir?
So my name is Joseph Koob. I'm in Republic. I have I'm the fourth generation from the area. Great grandfather was the immigrant who worked in what I understand from Paquette was a absolutely disastrous mine for workers. A horrible, horrible place. People lined up waiting for the next injury or death in order to get a job. That's how Paquette described it. In any event, I just wanted to maybe make a report more than have a question.
Sure.
Although I was just fascinated by the different points that you covered. Thank you.
Thank you.
The first thing I want to talk about is miners. Okay, so I know the miners. Okay, and the miners are Trumpers. The miners are Trumpers because we need a businessman as president. All right, which is a corollary of we need a businessman. It didn't make any difference whether he's a dishonest businessman or he's a low-life businessman or he's a philandering businessman. We need a businessman. Government. I'll use the rule of three. Okay, and so I think I covered it. And it was astounding to me the way that my family so totally lost their moral compass around this issue, which is what you said. When one's bread and butter is tied into, we don't rock the boat. Okay, so that's
right.
Okay. Another point is Republic in its heyday was 20,000 people. Henry Ford came through Republic. Thomas Edison came through Republic. They were interested in these resources, and I understand that throughout the UP, Ford, in fact, bought up 900,000 acres of mineral rights. Okay, so lots. All right. So I'm talking with my cousin. My grandmother was born in Park City, which is the whole now of the open pit in Republic. And it was a beautiful European town. And if you're acquainted with these kind of idyllic rural European towns, they have this varied topography. Everybody has 3 or 4 acres. There's a cow. There's a barn. It's almost new age. It's almost new age. You see the people out there planting their potatoes by hand with one of those old potato planters, if you're acquainted. The people who were not involved in the mine, the loggers, okay, were not involved with the mine because that was the other engine. Report to me, because we're still the last of the sons and daughters of immigrants there. We're still, we're at the very end right now. And these are wonderful people. You may want to talk with them.
Yeah, for sure.
The open pit was a disaster, and the destruction of Park City was an absolute disaster. They still grieve this beautiful place that they lived in. On the other hand, the miners, and I think my cousin Keith most clearly represents that view. Oh, by the way, from 20,000 people, we're 400 right now.
No, okay.
400 in the township. His view is, well, if they didn't have the mine, if they didn't move Park City, I live in one of those old houses that was moved, by the way. Well, there wouldn't be anything here.
Yeah.
I said, Keith, look around. It was almost like Vietnam, you know, in order to save the village, we had to destroy it. So that's a miner's point of view. And that miner's point of view is also informed by all the misinformation in order to maintain that point of view, so that January 6th was an Antifa conspiracy, clearly. And in fact, the whole thing was really an exercise, a legitimate exercise of First Amendment. And I've continued, I had my monologue long enough, but those are things that I'd like to share. And thank you for being on board about so many things. I could speak about the environmentalism. I could speak about Nate Heffron, the now city manager of Negaunee, all right, who is very much on board with this new economic, with the Tibbetts idea. Very, very much. We had coffee together not long ago. And I was just like, oh man, are you enlightened? Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So thank you.
No, thank you for your comments. There's a lot to unpack there, and there's a lot to go to. I will say sort of this is why I sort of want to get, particularly in this time frame, right, of this sort of perspective of miners, which has been hard. Tibbetts, I wish there was like a little bit more. I wish I had a little bit more. She talks about this. She had an opportunity briefly to meet with a local chapter of one of the mines, and like had a conversation with them about a project, her position, sort of the environmental movement at large. And she thought that was like the most, it's in that book that she wrote. Like she said, this was like an incredibly enlightening conversation that I had. It was really impactful because she also knew, like, as you point out, like there's often misinformation, particularly from the company, right? I mean, the company's obviously invested in shutting Tibbetts down. And Tibbetts obviously invested in, shutting the company down, but not shutting the company down, but like stopping this project. But she also laments, and there's like this vast in between that I want to know, like, what were those conversations like? She just says, I had this conversation. It was enlightening. I think they were with me and like saw the need for environmental protection. But then it sort of jumps ahead and she's like, but clearly the company got to them afterwards. And so like, I just wish there was more content. I wish there was more information. And that's what I'm hoping with some more time to sort of uncover like what's going on there. I certainly have positions about this history and sort of where I would stand in this debate, but I also do understand the perspective of miners who are sort of like feeling this moment, who are like worried about layoffs that are, they might be environmentalists in their mind, but they're also like, well, maybe like one more whole facility, one more loading facility is like going to help me keep my livelihood, my sort of position in life. I think that's the tension. That's why I find this period so fascinating, is because there is this transition, there's this precarity that's like bringing to the surface a lot of these tensions. I also think, political coalitions in rural areas are not, there needs to be more work done on understanding rural politics. I don't think they fit neatly into a sort of Republican or Democrat, and, which leads to these tensions of like, we're against government spending unless the federal government's going to drop a ton of federal spending into my district to help support a military or to sort of back this new power plant or something like that. I spent some time with the Charles Varnum papers also at NMU, and he and Jacobetti were like very close alliances on a lot of issues about fighting environmentalism, right? So like there is this sort of weird political alliances that form in the region during this time period that you see. I mean, I wrote about this in an essay in an edited collection a while ago. But like during the statehood movement, I mean, you have union members who are rubbing elbows with representatives from the American Enterprise Institute, talking about shutting down environmental legislation. These are people who do not get along on just about every issue, but see themselves in alliance over this particular issue of environmentalism. So I think there's just a lot of ebb and flow between sort of the politics. And I think environmentalism in this period of the 70s is a spark to sort of like shake things up a little bit.
Just to follow up on 3 points. First of all, words on the street among the miners, they've got 30 years. And so the grandfathers are happy that their grandsons, you know, are going to be able to raise their family, you know, in this kind of worker economic elite that they did. Well, the grandfathers didn't until the end. But and the second thing is, it's not clearly Republican and Democrat. The thing that's missing in the whole UP is an amnesia about the shock troops of the union movement, who are the socialists. There's like an amnesia around this. And so it's not Republican, it's not Democrat. And socialism is off the table because, of course, if you're, you know, it's better to be dead than red. Then finally, these statehood people in bed with the American Economic Institute, I'll tell you, they just are making whoopee together. And I don't understand the relationship as in real life, you know, I just don't understand the relationship, but so thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I have a question. I noticed that you didn't mention Native Americans at all. Native Americans were very prominent in opposing the Eagle Mine up in North Marquette County. I can remember helping my daughter with a research project she was doing in high school and looking at the Native American. There's an outcropping of rock there that has spiritual significance there. But were they ever? I mean, did they begin to show themselves? Have you come across anything of their involvement in any of this in the 60s? I know they were very much involved in the 80s in the fishing issue.
Right. Yeah.
But did you come across anything else? Because they seem to be very much involved now in questions of environmental preservation.
I have not yet, and that is absolutely something I would like to grow out, because I think that's another layer of sort of this complex fabric that is this time period, which is again sort of like, yes, like what is the indigenous perspective to different aspects of environmentalism or conservation, which is like those are different things as well, right? Like if you sort of a sheer preservationist vision of the environment versus sort of a conservationist. I did see a lot, as you note, the sort of fishing debates that were going on, like hostilities, outright violence outside of Escanaba between conservation officers who were attempting to monitor fish catches, right? And this is before sort of a lot of the tribal arrangements were sort of reinstored for fishing. But as far as mining, I have not seen anything, but that is absolutely like where I want to go next.
And to take you where you want to go, I might suggest, is that the Menominee tribe, Menominee County, Wisconsin, the Menominee tribe is deeply involved in stopping the Back 40 project in Stevenson.
Okay.
And they're making a kind of a coalition, because it's right on the Wisconsin border on the Menominee River, a coalition with the governor. The governor was at the demonstration holding a sign, for heaven's sakes. And also UPEC, the Upper Peninsula Environmental Coalition. They're all, and then there's very local people also. And it's very interesting. It's very wonderful to see the tribes working with the local people, working the environmentalists, working with the legitimate democratically elected governor of Wisconsin. So there you have it.
Yeah, no, that's great.
Okay, I got another one. You mentioned the citizens.
Or is somebody else?
Oh, there's one up there. Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I'm just curious with the discussion of proposing this area to the government based on the water and region. If that's how the Air Force Base is about at KI Sawyer.
Oh, interesting. Her question.
Yeah, sorry.
Was Dorman's effort to try to integrate military issues like the talked about the underground stuff, and then there was
Yeah.
the ELF. We haven't even mentioned Seafarer ELF. Which
Yeah.
was a military thing that my senior student assistant's been working on. We have that collection here as well. But I think her question is did that have any impact, or did that have anything to do with the establishment of KI Sawyer Air Force Base here? Is that correct?
That was a national policy.
Says the national policy.
Yeah, and there's probably more experts in the room than me on that, on the timing. My understanding is that Sawyer predates the 50s. That is a World War II or just after installation, right? I don't know when it was.
That was a Cold War,
It was, okay.
northern tier. There's a whole bunch of bases across the northern tier.
Yeah, there was concern because there was the base, small base, the small airfield or base or something, but it was outside of Sault Ste. Marie, and that had closed, I think, in the 70s as well. And that came up in the closure of it, and that's actually where Varnum comes into the conversation because he's close to that district that he represents. And so that sort of brings him into the fold of like, we need to increase federal spending in this way. So that's a long answer to say I don't know to your question, but I would be curious to know like that specific connection. What I do think it demonstrates is that like there is this larger movement, this larger, recognizing sort of the Cold War era, and particularly this early Cold War era when like there seems to be money everywhere for these sorts of projects, right? That will fall apart. Even sort of the Seafarer ELF like starts very grand, keeps getting watered down over time. Which is just to say, sort of like even that political will, that early political moment of this Cold War apparatus that can fund these things, that starts to dry up as the 60s go on to the point of like non-existence by the 1970s, in which you're starting to close down these military installations, which of course comes with its own economic impact. Which then it just like, again, it just goes back to this question of sort of like where the political ideology really stands on these, which is like for some small government, right? Like it's a small government, except in the case of federal spending and military and Cold War spending. And some like Dorman is just like, yeah, like let's get all the money. I'm not interested in necessarily all those ideological debates. Let's just get the development going. Like that's going to help this region.
Anybody else?
I just want to make one last comment about the statehood issue, because in many ways, after the effort in the 1970s, it seemed to go moribund. It's popped up again in the post-Tea Party movement.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And the idea amongst these groups, there's a couple of them online who are pushing it, is that because one of the arguments against statehood is the Upper Peninsula could never support its economy as a state. And their idea is, well, it could if we were a small government state like Hawaii. And so their idea is the UP should be a Tea Party state, because then we could do it, because we wouldn't have a government really. The government wouldn't be in charge of this and that and wouldn't have all this land. And so the idea is that's the only way we could become a state, even though that would deeply impact our university, our prisons, our national state forests and state campgrounds, and et cetera, et cetera. We don't need those because, that's government intrusions.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I guess my last question is about the Citizens to Save Superior Shorelines. You mentioned that that's a major collection that we have here. I've often wondered if they may have been one of the first organized environmental activist group in the Midwest, because they got started around 64. Is that right? And then really picked up over this issue with the power plant Little Presque Isle. Do you know, now I think you can say that they evolved into UPEC.
Mhm.
But were they significantly one of the first, because it was before the first Earth Day and before environmentalism really became a thing, and all of a sudden you got this group and this Dorothy Bird.
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
know,
I think they were, and they were an interesting. So I did spend a little bit of time with that collection, just to get a sense of sort of like the overview. What I thought was most interesting is, yes, their original project was sort of to stop the proposal, like the original proposal, I believe, was to expand sort of the coal loading facility out to Little Presque Isle. That they led the cause against that, which then sort of moved it back to expanding out at Presque Isle. If anyone can correct me if I'm wrong, I do believe that is the origins, but they actually start to move into sort of a politics that is probably more explicitly sort of like anti-development as the 1970s go on. I think the state wanted to create like a park, like a camping park at Little Presque Isle, and they actually led a movement against that, which again is this another layer of like anti-development environmentalism, which is pushing back even against sort of this earlier notion of like actually to get out into nature was to car camp, right? To bring your car, set up a tent next door. That was getting out into nature. They're definitely in the more sort of like wilderness preservation camp of things as well, which then is like this whole complex other sort of political argument as well, which is, I would argue, is in a different camp than Tibbetts. They're allies on particular issues, but they also have different ideas as organizations as well.
well, before we ended, I just wanted to point out to everybody this, you've probably seen this sitting here, right? This
Yes.
representation of the state of Michigan. This actually hung over Dominic Jacobetti's desk in the State House. And you can see the representation and juxtaposed. I think it's great. I mean, this is really encapsulates his attitude. Saw, you know, and he himself would become probably the second most powerful politician in the state.
Oh, yes.
After the governor, because of his longevity. When he died, he was almost in office for 45 years.
Longest serving.
Huh?
He was the longest serving
right,
legislator.
right.
He's the reason we have term.
It's the reason we have, it's the reason we have the university.
Yeah.
Okay, well, if that's it, then I want to thank Camden. Thank you very much.
Yes. Thank you all. This was great. I really appreciated this.
Definitely look forward to seeing you again this summer then.
Yeah, I'll be reaching out to you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And
Thank you, everyone.
Again, this is the University, Central Upper Peninsula and Northern University, Michigan Archives. Also, if you have a chance, go online and look up Uplink, our Upper Peninsula Digital Network. We have now over 75,000 digital objects representing the history of the UP on there, including some of the things that Camden has talked about today. That's it. Good. Thank you all very much. If you haven't, try to have something to drink or eat or whatever, and we'll be around to answer any questions. Thank you. DM is gone. Too fun. Yeah.